The entire NBA world just exploded. Luka Doncic of the Mavericks has been traded to the Lakers for Anthony Davis. I know. Your first reaction was probably like mine. Absolute shock. The trade threads on Reddit are on fire. Twitter's going crazy. Everyone's calling this the worst trade ever. But here's the thing. After sleeping on it, I've taken a moderated view that the Lakers got a great deal, but I can believe the Mavericks had a plan, however misguided. The lesson today? Sometimes taking a step back and reflecting can completely change how we see things. Let's break it down. Look, trades of this magnitude, where a top 5 player at age 25 gets traded, they just don't happen. And when they do, our first reaction is almost always emotional. Everyone's saying the Mavericks got fleeced and that they could have gotten more for Luka. And you know what? They probably could have. But before we bury the Mavericks, let's talk about what they are actually getting here. We're acting like Anthony Davis is some sort of consolation prize. But let's get real for a second. Among players who could win Defensive Player of the Year, Anthony Davis is probably the best offensive player of the bunch. Think about that. We might be looking at the best two-way player in the NBA. And if defense wins championships, well, it's hard to think of a better big man to play alongside Kyrie Irving. Now, here's the reality check about who's actually available. Let's break down the NBA's elite into tiers. If this trade tells us anything, there really aren't any untradeable NBA players. The only two who can legitimately claim that now are Wembanyama and Jokic. You aren't getting either of these two players under any circumstance. So let's just move on. The next tier is where Luka belongs. The other players on this list are untouchable because they are equally as good as Luka, or the individual and team circumstances would just dictate that they aren't being moved. It's not like these players are necessarily better than Luka, but these players are worth more to these franchises than what happens on the basketball court. So, who's left? The next tier are the players that their team wouldn't trade unless they were getting someone from one of the first two tiers. AD is arguably the best player on this list, and the player who could genuinely help the Mavericks win now. Sure, maybe Anthony Edwards would be nice, but good luck getting Minnesota to pick up the phone. Here's where it gets really interesting. If the Mavericks' goal was to get the best available player right now, this might actually be the best move they could have made. Now look, I'm not saying this is a good long-term trade. 2-3 years out could be rough. But the amount of disrespect being thrown at AD is wild. And here are some things that nobody's talking about. The Lakers might have actually been the one to say no if Dallas pushed for more. Think about it. Despite Luka being the better player, this actually could make the Lakers worse this season. Their roster suddenly has huge holes. No real center, defensive issues everywhere. And remember, this is potentially LeBron's last shot at a title run. The Lakers don't just punt on that lightly. And so there is a world where if the Mavericks push too hard for too many additional assets, the Lakers say no. Now, I'm seeing a lot of Mavs fans upset that Dallas only negotiated with the Lakers. Why not creating bidding war, they're saying. But hold up. This assumes that the Mavericks were dead set on trading Luka. If you're exploring options but aren't sure you want to trade your franchise player, then the last thing you want is for that info to leak. Imagine the Mavs decide to keep Luka, but he finds out they were trying to get rid of him. That relationship would never recover. If the Mavericks were focused on specifically getting Anthony Davis in a win-now move, and there are actual reports indicating that this was the case, then you don't start quibbling about the marginal assets. You pull the trigger and you get it done. But here's the part of the story where you can learn a life lesson. There's this fascinating thing called loss aversion. Our brains literally feel losses twice as strongly as we feel gains. It's why we stay in jobs we hate because we're scared of losing stability. It's why we hold on to losing stocks even if we don't think it's a good future investment. And yes, it's why NBA fans freak out when their star players get traded. So next time you see something that seems absolutely crazy at first glance, whether it's a blockbuster trade, a friend's life choice, or even your own gut reaction to a life-altering event, do yourself a favor. Take a deep breath, sleep on it, and give yourself time to really process it. You might just see things in a completely different light. After you've had some time to process this trade, let me know what you think about it in the comments below. I love engaging with people and their opinions, especially when they're different from mine, and I'm really interested on people's takes after they let some of the emotions settle down.